Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss today's King's Speech, the last one before the election, and discuss how it speaks yet again of Sunak's political naivety, and most important of all, wonder if Rishi Sunak's Chief of Staff is really a secret agent for Labour. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, the King's Speech, for most people, no longer just the title of a film, but an actual event. Although Charles has carried out this duty at the state opening of Parliament before, that was just covering for his ill mother at the time. This is the first time he's done it as king, and the first time there's been a King's Speech in over 70 years. To say it was a bit of a nightmare on multiple levels would be an understatement. Being clear, you wouldn't expect me to approve of a King's Speech from a Tory government at the best of times, although there are usually some things contained which are good. There are, after all, always things for the government to do which are not party political. However, most of those seem to have been omitted this year. The ban on conversion therapy, reforming the Mental Health Act, introducing safeguards against AI, there are a few others as well. They had cross-party support. The Conservatives have suggested that they would do these things, and they were all dropped. The ban on live exports has been included, which is good, but then that was included before and not implemented, so don't hold your breath. There was also a passage about improving renters' rights. You go, okay, wasn't that in last time? Yeah. Didn't they drop it? Yeah. Don't hold your breath again. So rather than focusing on individual policies, let's go over some political basics with examples. So this speech is going to define the government's pitch to the voters when the general election is called. It is a pre-election speech. The money seems to be on next autumn now. That means they've got enough time to implement some things and show voters they can get things done. In fact, an October 2024 election will mean that Rishi Sunak has had 2 years as Prime Minister to achieve something, as well as several years as Chancellor, as well as the Conservative Party in general having had 14 and a half years. So what theme did Sunak's King's Speech take? Was it about all the improvements that people could expect to see unlocked next year? Now, the theme was very much in line with the theme at the recent and fairly disastrous Tory party conference. They thought to themselves, well, that went badly, let's repeat it for the King's Speech. Long-term decisions. Long-term decisions for a brighter future. So this is essentially how the Tories are presenting themselves to the public now. After over 13 years of declining public services and general living standards, the Tories are talking about doing things which will bear fruit in the long term. Okay, so not before the election then. No. So why would we vote for you then? Oh, because we're doing things for the long term. Yeah, but you've had 14 years and things are just getting worse. Like, what are you going to do to show that you're capable of delivering in the long term? You don't have to be a focused political observer to know this doesn't make sense. There's a certain pattern to a parliamentary cycle. The long-term decisions are what you implement early on in that cycle, straight after the election when you're really popular. The reason for that is you'll get no credit for them. Because that's the thing about long-term decisions. You don't get the benefits for the long term, but you pay now. And people begrudge the costs. So you do it early so it doesn't become a stick to beat you with at the next election. You also, of course, implement medium-term plans, which should bear fruit in time for the following election. So that way, when the election comes along and says, well, at the start of the parliamentary cycle, we implemented these things, and we said these things would take a few years to come online, and you can see they have, and now it's made your life better. And these things we always said would take 10 to 15 years, so, but you've proven that you can do things because the stuff that was going to take a few years worked. And the parliamentary cycle continues with more short-term decisions being favoured towards the end. And that is because once you're within a year of the next election, the public may have forgotten what you did shortly after the election, or even if they haven't, it's like, well, you've done that now. What are you going to do for me in the future? The fact that they've got a short-term memory, it's both good and bad. It's good because they've forgotten about the money you spent on something that will be useful, but not for a while. But it's bad because they also forgot about the things which actively improved their lives almost straight away. So you need to keep feeding the beast. You need to keep being able to ask voters if things are better than they were at the last election, and you need voters to say yes. And in order for people with that very short-term political memory to do so, they need to feel that the improvements are happening all the time. Sunak needs people to feel that things are getting better now as well as getting better next year. But things are getting worse now and will still next year. Sunak seems to think that, because inflation will probably be down to about 3% next autumn, that'll somehow make everything better. No, it won't, will it? The economy is really struggling. Like, I can tell you, as someone who derives almost all of my income from ad revenue, this year is way worse than last year. It's quite insane. There's a certain pattern to ad revenue, which you observe as a YouTuber, or indeed anyone in advertising effectively at either end. You know, as in the build up to Christmas, massive amounts of trade going on, massive amounts of advertising, absolutely huge. And then it sort of drops off of a cliff after Christmas. So the start of the year, trade's very low, you know. The rate of ad revenue income at the moment in November, which is like peak, November, December, absolute peak of the year, is below what it was in February. This is unheard of. I've been monetizing YouTube content for like 8 years. This has never happened before. You know, this year is way worse than last year. ITV have been complaining about ad revenue. This is all a sign of weak consumer confidence. Consumer confidence is weak when people are feeling the pinch. And I will reiterate, it's much worse this year after 12 months of a Sunak government than it was when Liz Truss was taking a hammer to the public finances. Now, that's not to say Sunak is actually even worse than Truss. That is clearly not the case. It's just to say that he hasn't rescued the situation. So he's allowed it to carry on getting worse. So why would we suppose he's not going to carry on letting it get worse next year? So Sunak and the Tories are behind Starmer and Labour in the polls, badly behind. So that's their starting position with 12 months to go. Then Sunak announces a final legislative programme which doesn't even claim to deliver any benefits before the election. So then you look at the detail because, you know, reality rarely has much bearing on political success. Politics is all about perception. As unconventional as this line is, it might just work if you could at least convince voters that his long-term decisions really will be good for the long term. Which is where he comes unstuck again. You know, you've got this commitment to multinational oil companies, one of whom was kind enough, coincidentally, to agree a $1.5 billion contract with his father-in-law's company. This is unpopular with swing voters. It's also not fooling anyone that it's a long-term decision. We know the long-term decisions are not in fossil fuels. That's obvious to most voters. Swing voters know that the green revolution driving American policy is the way forward, and we need to catch up. Top of people's concerns are the economy, including their own personal standard of living and job security, of course, as well as healthcare, with housing and immigration usually to a lesser extent depending on the voters. On the economy, there was really nothing other than saying commitments to the oil industry are somehow good for the economy. Like I say, people don't really believe it, especially with the behaviour of the last few years. On living standards, nothing really. I mean, you could argue the improvements for renters, but then that doesn't work because, first of all, they've already promised it and not delivered, and Labour are promising it anyway, so that's not really an issue to stick to voting for the Tories on. On healthcare, there was a promise to lower waiting lists, but we've had that promise before and they're just going up, you know. And regardless of what Sunak does from now on in with the NHS, with 1 year left to go, he can't possibly, with the best will in the world, which he does not have, get the waiting list down to where it was under Labour. But it's hard to see how he could even get it below where it started out when he became Prime Minister. Right now, the waiting list just keeps getting higher. You know, going down... having a little downward turn just before the election, that's not good enough because Labour will just point out, yeah, but it's still higher than when you started. And it's way higher than when the Tories started. And it's also hard to see how he'll even get a little downward tick if he wants a Halloween election. For housing, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Are you building houses or are you not? No, but we've got loads of excuses. I mean, they look completely shambolic. Constant U-turns on house building promises. And it's all very well trying to claim that Starmer's blocking house building. People know that he doesn't have the power to block anything. And, of course, Labour have their own policies to ramp up house building. As for immigration, this is the Tories' usual safe place. Without the protection of EU membership, they usually blame the EU. Well, now they can't. So now they're badly exposed and they don't know what to do. Their rhetoric's just not matching the reality. After over 14 years, anyone who considers immigration is an issue and is aligned with the Conservatives' attitudes to immigration is not going to be impressed with more excuses. They want results. Again, leaving the election until autumn risks a good summer, raising numbers. Sunak is currently claiming, channel crossing is 20% down this year. Now, I don't know if that's exactly right, but, I think they are down. And it's like a combination of two things. First of all, a returns agreement with Albania. So international agreement there. Nothing to do with their headline policies, right? And dodgy weather in the channel at parts of this summer. But if they make no further returns agreements with anyone else, and let's say the weather is better next year, then the numbers could go up. He could have to, post increased numbers next year. How's that going to look just before the election? There's quite a lot in Sunak's pre-election strategy that is dependent upon getting a lot of good fortune. It could work out for them, but they're relying on luck. And the rest almost seems calculated to annoy voters. To the point where you have to wonder, the right-wing press keep trying to suggest that Labour activists are popping up all over the place. Sue Gray, when they decided they wanted to attack Sue Gray, it was like, her son's Labour activist. He's going to become a Labour candidate. She's working for Labour now. It was all a Labour stitch-up. And, they'll find Labour activists everywhere. That person's in Labour. It's all a stitch-up. And they're all frustrating the work of the Tory government as if somehow Labour are the establishment. Well, Sunak's political advice over the last year has been so monumentally awful that I'm seriously wondering if we're going to discover that his chief of staff, Liam Booth-Smith, will turn out to be an actual Labour secret agent. Once he's done his work and the Tories get smashed in the election, he'll wait a discreet period, no doubt, and then a couple of years later suddenly join the Labour Party. The ultimate infiltrator. Because it's really hard for me to believe that he's actually trying to give Sunak useful advice, and this is the result. As for the concept of the King's Speech itself, I think this is another case of the Tories utterly destroying a tradition which, we never really needed, but it wasn't a bad thing. But I think it now has to be consigned to the dustbin. It's painfully obvious that Charles was made to read out a load of anti-climate rhetoric which he will never have wished to read out in a million years. We sort of know that the King isn't reading out his own words in these things. We know that the Queen never read out her own words. They're written by the government. We get that. But today's spectacle just made the whole thing a farce. The tradition should just end. I mean, traditions are traditions, but, when they become ridiculous, just stop them. By all means, have the monarch involved in the state opening of Parliament, but, let him give his own speech, and that, which doesn't have to interfere with any government lines. And then the King should, at the end of it, just call on the Prime Minister to read out his own bloody speech. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.